In today's video, I'm going to speak about basic job interview etiquette that every student should be aware of. It's worth reminding you before we go into this video that there is a playlist on job interview questions on my channel. It's a mixture of generic questions and also questions related to specific jobs, as you can see here, for example, as a sports scientist. So I do recommend that you subscribe to the channel to keep up to date with the relevant content. So I'll speak now about the importance of etiquette in an interview. And your qualifications, the experience that you have, that's one thing, but basic manners and interpersonal skills will go a long way at the interview stage. And there's a quote that I hear all the time from employers when they're going through the process of bringing new staff in. And well, this person is the strongest candidate on paper. So the CVs, the cover letters looks great, but let's see how they perform in the interview. Meaning you've still got a chance to really mess up when you get to the interview and kind of sabotage your own work. I'll go now into 7 different areas you should focus on in regards to your etiquette at a job interview. And I'll start off with the first one. Be polite to everyone that you encounter. Because when you go to an interview, you're nervous, you're thinking about impressing the panel, but think about all the different people that you're likely to meet, converse with on the day of the interview. So have a few seconds to look at that and think of different people you're going to meet. And I've seen it go wrong where people come in and they're a bit arrogant, their personality's not quite right with the people they're deemed to be that important, but then they'll turn it on to the panel. But people will communicate. Panel will speak to different members of staff afterwards and say, well, what do you think of this person? And they'll get an honest opinion, and that can influence the panel's decision whether they employ you or not. Secondly, you need to make sure you dress accordingly. And that sounds really obvious, but if you're in a practical line of work, such as sports science, and you get an interview, you're not sure if you need to wear a waistcoat, shirt, trousers. It could be something more like a tracksuit. So I would recommend that you bring 2 sets of clothing, bring different shoes, your smart shoes, your trainers, if it is a practical job. But use common sense, speak to the employer first. It hopefully will be clear in the interview what the process is. So if there's a practical element, you've got to bring 2 sets of clothing. But if you're unsure, do speak to the employer beforehand. Thirdly, you've got the handshake, and it's the body language that comes with it as well. So when you're waiting for the person to come in, address you, once they do come in, stand up, smile, be positive, walk over to them, go for the handshake. You don't want to be that wet fish sort of handshake, but at the same time, you're not trying to break their hand. So you got to find that middle ground where it's a firm handshake, you look them in the eye, you get the basics right. In relation to that body language, so once you're in the chair and you're being asked questions, you're answering them, one thing I always think about is address everyone when you're answering a question. If there are 3 or 4 people in a room and you get asked a question and you just stare at one person the whole time as you're answering, it doesn't look great in the interview. And I break that down for you. You imagine you're in this position here, you're in the chair getting asked the questions. The person on the right is asking the question. Now, if you answer that, looking at the person who's asked the question, you don't look at the people on the left, it's just really awkward. And if I was one of those 2 people, I'd find that really impolite. So you need to make sure when you getting these questions, you start off with the person on the right. Let's say they ask the question. You look around at everyone as you're answering that question, and you finish off looking at the person who asked it. There's other basics as well you need to consider, such as don't fold your arms, don't put your hands on your knees the whole time. That will just make you look really nervous. And other basics include sitting up straight as well. I'm guilty of this. I'll come off some of my Zoom classes with my students and think to myself, did I really just sit like that for 40 minutes? Not ideal, but you can get away with it in that situation. An interview, if you're slouched, your posture's poor, it's little things that can cost you. Next, you need to read the room. And what I mean by this is you get to interviews, and some panels are very serious, it's very professional. You need to expect that every time you have an interview, but sometimes you can be surprised. It's very light-hearted. The panel will try and make you feel really comfortable. They're cracking jokes, they're making it fun. But remember, you're not there to be funny. You're not there to be a clown. And if in doubt, don't make a silly joke. Now, if the panel are very light-hearted, they're making it fun, yeah, be on a similar level. But if it's serious, just avoid that silly joke. I say that because I was like that. I'm getting better, but I'm the sort of person who has to make a silly joke. It's like word vomit for me. And I've had to learn over the last 2 or 3 years to stop doing it. And one example I can give you of the past was an interview in Leeds where I was walking into the building, it was pouring down with rain. I got greeted by the panel and they asked me how I was doing, and I said, great, but lovely weather outside, isn't it? Thinking I was really funny, taking the piss out of Leeds a bit, having a bit of a laugh with the panel. They didn't find it very funny. The whole panel was from Leeds, and within the first 10 seconds, I thought, I've blown this interview because I've offended everyone that's looking at me. So, in relation to that, number 6, avoid negativity. And you don't want to criticize your current or your former employers. You might have hated your last job, you might have hated um, your last university, whatever it is that you're talking about. Don't say that though. It's going to look really bad if you're negative. And even if you're saying it in jest, it's light-hearted, it's just your dry sense of humour. They don't know your sense of humour yet. You can get away with it when you've got the job and they know what you like, but in the interview setting, they don't know who you are. So avoid those silly little jokes, like I said about Leeds and the weather, things like that. You need to focus on the positive aspects. So let's say you're speaking about a previous job. Let's say there's 30% of it you really liked. Focus on that. If you're going to speak about negativity, you might use phrases like, this challenged me, well, this was difficult, but just saying this was crap, this is rubbish, God, you should have seen my last boss, you might think it's funny and an icebreaker, it's not going to work for you. And finally, show your gratitude to the panel. They've taken a lot of time to interview you, to prepare for you, and you're one of 5, 10 people they're seeing that day. So they will appreciate it if you do simply say thank you. Thanks for having me. You don't want to be overly patronized and say, oh God, that must have been so hard for you today, speaking to all these people, God help you. Keep it simple. Just say thank you for having me. And what you can do as well is consider sending a follow-up email too. So I'd do this, let's say the interview was 9, 10 in the morning, maybe 5, 6 o'clock, early evening. Send an email. And something along these lines. Very, very brief. You can see this email here. Thank you for having me today. It was a pleasure to meet you all. If you want any more information about me, please don't hesitate to get in touch. Very, very simple. Don't send a big essay. They've already spoken to you all day. They don't need this huge email at the end. So what have we learned today then about etiquette? Well, the strongest candidate on paper doesn't always get the job. That's only half the battle, putting your CV, your cover letter in. And etiquette is really simple. I think everything I've been through today isn't overly new information or particularly challenging to actually act on. But people, including myself, make these mistakes. That's why I created this video. A lot of things I've spoken about, I've gone wrong. So what you need to do is do the simple things really well. I love this phrase, and I'll be using it a lot on the channel. But get the basics right with your manners, your dress code, how professionally you acting, and positivity. So if you have an interview coming up soon, as a checklist, these are sort of things you should think about. Check the dress code, but use your initiative. You don't always have to email a company and ask about the dress code. Sometimes it's pretty clear. But like I've said, if it's a practical job and they haven't made it clear what you have to do exactly, there's no harm in asking. Secondly, rehearse the answers. You don't want to sound too robotic, but you do need to rehearse them. Before a very big interview that I'll have, the pressure's on, I need to prepare these questions first and think about how I'm going to answer them. They don't always come up, but that preparation will pay off. And if you're really confident, not too shy about going on camera or being in front of the mirror, work on your body language. Maybe film yourself answering a question, or just answer a question in front of the mirror. What are your hands doing? Are your hands in your pockets? Are you fidgety? I appreciate an interview is more nerve-wracking. Can you fully replicate it? Possibly not. But there's certain little things you can still pick up on in the rehearsal. Okay, so that was my short video on basic job interview etiquette every student should be aware of. I would ask that you subscribe to the channel so you can keep up to date with more content. And if you'd like to discuss this further, if you have an interview coming up you'd like to talk about, please get in touch. Sports Science Hacks on Instagram. Okay, thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.